Coming up next on the Wet Fly Swing podcast.
The consumer electronics industry is just so much bigger than fly fishing. Fly fishing is small. That's what I took was I want to keep doing what I like doing. It's not about the money or how big you can grow a company. It's about what do you really like to do day to day? What is your involvement in the company? And I like to design. I like to do create content. I like to fish, and I like to talk to my customers.
That was Jeff Sasaki on what growing a company the right way is all about. Ultralight Euro nymphing gear, the Truckee River, and the Element case today on The Swing.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today.
Hey, how you doing today? Thanks for stopping by the show. Instagram right now at Wet Fly Swing. If you want to follow us on Instagram and ask a question, we're also going to be eventually giving away some swag right there. The best chance to follow what we have going. Check us out right now. Today's episode is sponsored by Mavrk Fly Fishing. They make the lightest Euro nymphing reel in the world, which makes your rod more sensitive, casting more accurate, and you can hold your dead drifts longer without shoulder burn. Check out Mavrk Fly Fishing's Stinger and their other Euro nymph products and support this podcast by heading over to wetflyswing.com/Mavrk right now. That's Mavrk, M-A-V-R-K, wetflyswing.com/Mavrk. Check out the lightest and most unique Euro nymphing reel right now. Jeff Sasaki takes us into what it's like to build a massive brand in the cell phone accessories business and why he transferred over to producing unique fly fishing gear. We find out how to fish dries with a Euro nymphing setup, how Newton's law affects your casts, and his take on the center axis fly reel. Plus, we get an update on Mavrk fly fishing and why it's so important not to whiff it. Here we go. Jeff Sasaki from MavrkFlyFishing.com. How you doing, Jeff?
Good. How you doing, Dave?
Good. Great to have you back here on the show today. We're going to dig into a little bit of a tweak from some of our tips and tricks. I guess there's going to be some tips and tricks here, but we're going to talk about new product development, product design, because you're an expert in this field. You've created some products we're going to talk about both in fly fishing and outside. But give us a little update since our last podcast. We talked, kind of your rods and reels and everything on the last one and Euro nymphing. But what have you been up to since that last episode we did? I guess it's been, a few months?
Yeah. I'd say the main thing is that we're expanding our rod line. And I've been working for a long time on, my goal was to design a pro-level rod at a very good price, being able to sell it online and direct. But it took me a long time to develop the rod that I liked. And but we finally got it, and by the time this airs, we'll probably have it all launched, and I'm just pretty excited about that.
Nice. And what is this one? So I was actually on the river this last week, and I used your rod and caught some nice fish, and I want to talk about that a little bit today. But talk about the rod that I used versus this new rod. How are they different, and why did you go into creating another rod?
Okay, yeah, they're both 3 weights. The rod you have is 3/4 weight, so it's a little heavier weight. So it may not cast the smaller nymphs as well, but it's going to cast some of the bigger streamers and bigger, heavier weighted flies a bit better. The rod you have is it's called a convertible rod because it can be fished as a 9-footer or a 10-foot 3, depending on if you put the little insert piece in there. But what I really wanted to do, I like rods right around the 10-foot range. I haven't really found too many rods over 10 feet 6 that I like. And that's what I really wanted to do. I wanted a longer rod, but it had to have the right action, and it needed to be really lightweight. So I focused on that. I wanted to make a 10 feet 6 rod, but I wanted it to be super light and durable, and I wanted to cast really well. So the rod you have, because it's a convertible, it's going to break down. It's in 5 pieces, so it breaks down smaller, and that's the advantage of that. It fishes really well because it's a pretty high-end carbon fiber. It's a 40T. T is in tonnage. So it's a pretty light rod. The rod you have in its 10-foot 3 section is about 3.3 ounces. So it's fairly light. And when you break that down to fish it as a 9-footer, you're fishing under 3 ounces. So it's a pretty light rod, but I wanted to go longer. Like I said, a 10-foot 6 range, but I wanted it to be under 3 ounces. So that means going up to the best carbon fiber that I can find, and that was Japanese carbon fiber that is a tonnage rating of a 46T. And that allowed me to make a longer rod with the action I wanted with the super lightweight. And this is a 4-piece rod. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, so the flex is going to be coming down a little bit further in the midsection than the rod you have. Your rod is pretty rigid in the base, so it's a faster acting rod, action rod. And this new one is probably I'd say a moderate to fast. So just a really nice longer length. It seems like to me that the longer you go, the lighter the rod has to be.
Yeah. So that's it. So basically the rod I have is, yeah, and it has that extra piece, which I fished. I fished the 10-3 and it seemed perfect. But again, I'm not an expert in it, but it seemed great. I didn't even try it without, for the shorter range, but essentially the new rod you're building is going to be longer and lighter than the one that I use, which is an advantage. But a lot of people, do you think some people might not even notice the difference, or is this more for upper level Euro folks?
Yeah, well, it's kind of both because a longer rod's going to be is easier to fish. The whole thing with Euro nymphing and the problems people have with Euro nymph casting is getting that slack out of the line, and a longer rod is going to do that. So there's a couple ways to get slack out of your line, and one is a longer rod, just because it has more travel, right? It has more distance, so it pulls the slack out easier, but it's not as fast. I mean, it just has more resistance in the wind. So casting a small rod, a 9-footer or 9.6, if you're used to smaller rods, can be good too, because it's quicker and you can take slack out with that speed. It's just you have to have the timing right more on a shorter rod. So with the longer rod, it can be easier just because the timing doesn't have to be spot on like a shorter rod. So as you get better and as you progress,
Right.
you can get better at the shorter rods.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and if you're not fishing a very big river, if you're fishing something small, say like the Provo, you can cast all the way across the river with a 9-foot rod, no problem.
So this is making sense. And again, this is like everybody's seeing my challenges, but I've tried with the shorter rods, and I remember struggling. And with your rod, the 10-3, I mean, I was casting it great. I wasn't casting, across the river or even 50 feet, but it was casting easy. And I remember the first time I was out Euro nymphing, it was really a challenge, just to cast it. And I remember even George Daniel, I think on a recent episode, mentioned the same thing you just said there, is that, yeah, it's all about slack. You need to get the slack out of your line, because that's the key casting these really light setups, right?
Yeah, and getting the slack out of the line is all about timing, because the slack is in the air, right? You're aerializing your cast, and it's usually that slack in the back cast. So as you're pulling the rod back in your back cast, you've got all that slack and that loop you got to get out. And a longer rod does that easier. A shorter rod is harder, because you have to wait longer, and then you have to go forward with a little bit more speed with the smaller rod. But the other thing too is just the advantage of a longer rod as far as reach. That's the other big component in Euro nymphing, is to be able to reach and suspend that line off the water. So if you're fishing around boulders and pocket water, I mean, the ability to reach and get your line around a boulder and fish both sides of the seam that's below the boulder, if you can fish the far seam and the inside seam, you're at a huge advantage. So in cases like that, a longer rod is better. It may not be as fast, and it may feel a little bit slower and heavier, but the advantage of reach in certain waters is just huge.
It's better. That's it. And then eventually there's some length, right? I mean, why not go up to 13 feet? Like, is it just a weight thing, on the length of the rod?
Yeah, at that point, to me, I found that anything over 10.6, even 10.8, I don't like 10.8s. They just, you reach that point of diminishing return where your rod is heavy and you can't cast it as well, and you can't even dead drift. You can't take advantage of that extra length and that reach because it's heavier, and you start dropping your shoulder and your elbow, and all of a sudden, and that's it for your dead drift, right? So that's why the longer your rod is, the more important it is for it to be light, so you can just suspend that rod and that line off the water surface.
Perfect. Well, this is great. I love that we started with kind of a little on design, because we talked about product design. And let's take it back real quick on, where you kind of came from. We talked about this in the last episode, as far as, before you got into Mavrk, but talk about that product you had. It was was it the Element case that you created this brand?
Oh, Element Case? Yeah. That was the company I had right before Mavrk.
Yeah, and I remember that. I remember those cases. I mean, that was a major. I don't know what sort of market share you had, but that was a giant brand because I mean, I know I heard about. I didn't have one, but I knew of Element, right? So, how did first? Do you want to start us off with like some, how you got into Element, industrial design? Where do you think would be a good place to start this conversation?
Oh, yeah, I guess we can work backwards or back to the beginning where my degree and my background is in product design.
Yeah, let's start there. Let's talk because I think what I want to have people listening now to have a little insight in is, if they're thinking there's somebody here that's maybe thinking like, hey, I've got this idea for a product. How do I bring that product to market? And you've been there a number of times. So do you want to start there and just let's start the beginning real quick and talk about that. So like if somebody is thinking about this, do they have to get an education to bring a product and create a brand and go there?
It all depends on what the product is. I mean, before there was industrial designers, everything was just designed by engineers or anybody who can create something in 3D. But now it's a very specialized profession where we look at human factors, we look at styling, we have to look at marketing.
Is that different, Jeff, from say describe industrial design versus say other types of design and engineering? What is industrial design?
Yeah, industrial design versus graphic design. Graphic design is 2D, so everything on a 2D, like all the graphics on a web page, all the graphics on apparel or textiles. Industrial design is 3D, so we're designing things in 3D. Car designers are industrial designers, furniture designers, computer designers. Anybody designing anything in 3D is an industrial designer. And then the difference between industrial design and engineering, say mechanical engineering, is we would come up with the design, but we would work closely with mechanical engineers. So we have to know some mechanical engineering as far as basic 3D construction, 3D CAD. But we're not going to go in there and run formulas and say, okay, this wall thickness has to be this thick and it's got to have this draft angle on it. We're not getting into those kind of details. We're basically using 3D design to help us conceptualize and build overall basic design. And then we're working with them to get it into the manufacturing details and engineering and, like, let's see, multiple analysis. We would never get into that. It's like, okay, how does in an injection molding process, how does plastic flow? Those kind of details, we let them figure it out.
Oh, right. Like, for example, I'm just thinking the different products, but the rotomolded coolers, right?
Exactly.
Like those have just been because of Yeti and all these. I mean, they're just everywhere now. They cost a arm and a leg, but they keep the ice lasting longer. But they're also heavy, right? There's kind of give and takes. But is that how you look at the products? Is there's always kind of you can't have everything, and you kind of find that little sweet spot?
Yeah, we look at the parameters, what the product needs to be. It's like, okay, we need to design a cooler. It's gotta have this much volume, and it's gotta keep ice cold for this many days, and all that's pretty basic. And then the look of it, how the handles and the latches are designed, and then we will start working with an engineer to detail it out. He will figure out, okay, what are the actual numbers, and he'll do the number crunching, and he'll figure out all the specifics of getting into manufacturing. And then there's a lot of design and engineering has to do with cost. So we can't just come up with a design and have it engineered out, and in the end, the thing's going to cost $1,000.
Right.
We can't do that. So we have to stay in those parameters. So the industrial designer, he's the guy or the girl that has a little bit of knowledge in all areas and pulls it all together.
Gotcha. Jack of all trades.
Yeah. And
master of nothing, jack of all trades, right?
Yeah, master of nothing for sure. So like when we design cars, we do a lot of sketches, and we do that's how I started out in industrial design, is automotive design. And so you do a lot of sketching, and then you go to the next phase.
What company would you start with?
I started out with Peterbilt trucks.
Oh yeah.
In school, we worked on automotive design and developed all our skills there. And then after school, that's when I went to Peterbilt and designed interiors and exteriors and more aerodynamic shapes. But so that's one designer for a whole. There was probably 24 engineers there, and they're all working on mechanical engineers.
Wow.
So I'm doing the styling, and I'm doing all the sketches, and go to the next step, and then do some clay modeling, go to the next step, test it in the wind tunnel, the aerodynamics. And then when it's all looks like we're good, then engineers kind of take over and they start building it.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's the same with automotive design, but you've got teams of designers.
This is cool. I love this stuff. It's so interesting because I've done some product stuff. It's been pretty pathetic, before the podcast and the Wet Fly Swing. I did some stuff like some Amazon FBA, and and it was interesting because I'm glad I did it, right? Because I got this experience for a few years. But what I realized was like, wow, just the challenge of logistics and stuff, not even talking about the product, is crazy. But you are doing. So let's take an element case, because we're going to get into Mavrk a little bit too, but I want to hear this element case story. First, where'd that idea come from, and how did you take it to like a market leader, and then you sold it eventually, right?
Yeah, well, I started out in, like I said, automotive design, and then I went into did some high tech stuff in the Silicon Valley, and I spent a lot of time there. But then I really realized that my heart was in outdoors and action sports, so I started working for a motocross company, Fox Racing, where I designed on helmets, boots, and chest protectors. So my specialty became protective gear. And when I left there, I started a company and just outsourced. And I was a contract designer for different action sports companies. So I did a little work with Specialized and Shift Racing and some European companies, motocross companies. So that became kind of my specialty, was protective gear. And I was riding a lot at that time, and I was crashing a lot like you do on a motorcycle and bike, and I was breaking a lot of phones. And so yeah, and that was business started to get really slow. It was a recession, so I spent a lot of time in the shop tinkering, and my focus was to make an indestructible iPhone case. So I machined it out of aluminum, and it came out pretty cool, had a cover on it, and just decided, maybe I'll just try to market this. And that was kind of my intro to entrepreneurship, was to go from designer to let's market this thing, and learning how to market. And so I created this product. Took a while, dabbled with the first iPhones, the second iPhones, and iPads, and it was going okay. It wasn't going well, but iPhone 4, that was the big one. That was the one that really just blew up. And it was because that was when that iPhone was lost in a pub near my house. It happened to be right down the street from my house. And it was international news. Apple loses a prototype in a bar. And
oh, wow.
Some guy finds it, and he tries to return it to Apple, and they don't get back to him. They ignore him. It's like Apple didn't know what to do.
Oh, wow. So they have this prototype that nobody's ever seen this thing. It's like the first ever.
Yeah.
And so some random guy finds it and wants to return it, but Apple is afraid to even respond because they don't want to admit that that's their phone or something like that.
Who knows why they didn't respond, but he tried, and he couldn't get it back to them. And then he took pictures of it, and he gave it to one of those big tech blog sites. I can't remember if it was TechCrunch or Tech Gear, one of those.
Yeah.
And they just blew up the story. And now all of a sudden the whole world is watching.
And what was the Apple for? I'm trying to think, because now I've got the Apple, whatever it is, 11 or something. Why was the Apple 4 the big game changer?
Because it had glass on both sides, and it was the first phone.
Yeah.
And it had this stainless steel band around the outer perimeter. And that's why I was real intrigued. That design was so cool. And because it happened right down the street from my house in the Bay Area, I was drawn to that story too. So every time that tech company, they took it apart and they showed the internals.
Oh, that's what they did.
Yeah. And I went to every electrical engineer I knew, and I said, hey, is this real? Is this real? Because if it is, I want to design a case for this, because Apple never releases any products or designs. They're very secretive. In fact, you can get in trouble if you get designs from one of their manufacturers in China.
Sure.
And you build a case for it, you're kind of on their list, and they don't want to work with you.
Oh, right. So if you build, you can't go behind their back.
Yeah, there's only certain companies they have a agreement with to do that. And some of those big companies that they sell in the Apple store, they let them have the information. But a small company like Element Case, they'd never give it to us. So anyway, I designed this case and didn't even finish it. It was just a rendering, a really nice CAD rendering. And we got it out on our site, and it just blew up. And it was so big that we got so many orders at the time, it just went viral and it just shut down the server that was hosting our site. It was a company in Australia and they had to shut us down because it took down their whole company. There was so much traffic.
Wow.
So yeah, it was just crazy. We were shut down. And the whole story with that is just amazing how we had to come out of that. And
Damn.
we didn't even have the product built. And all of a sudden we have all these orders coming in.
These are pre-orders.
Well, at that time, we didn't even think to have a pre-order list. We just said, hey, if you want to order it and pay for it, go ahead and we'll get it to you.
Wow.
But it was so big that we had to stop and just stop taking orders. And
how did you get that? Let's take it back there a little bit. So you got this iPhone, and the iPhone 3 was the one that was kind of rounded side. I remember I had both. So the iPhone 3 was like rounded. And then when the iPhone 4 came out, yeah, they came out with this like nice sharp edges, right?
Right.
And it was just a different phone. And then you had the glass on both sides.
Uh-huh.
You designed that case. How did you go? You just create a website and then instantly Google found you guys? How did you get to all this traffic right away?
We already had a case and people were already kind of had their eye on us. We were kind of this new up and coming kind of cool company that did build it cool stuff. But when that came out, I designed a case that was just a band, a perimeter, a band that was machined out of aluminum. And at that time, cases were really cheap, but I think mine was $79 and that just blew people's minds. And that's, the cost and the design and all that, that's what made it go viral. But that's what basically started the company. And we just kind of grew from there. And at that point, we were still in my garage in San Carlos. And then from there, it was just a mad race to get production going and hire more machine shops. I was working with a machine shop up in Oregon at the time. And, they can only pump out maybe 25 models a week. And it's like, oh, you don't understand. We have 22,000 people waiting for this.
Right. Damn.
It was just crazy. And then as time went on and we couldn't deliver, because the other thing that happened that was paralyzing was PayPal locked our account.
Oh, wow.
And they do that for security because, right, if you can't just go on the internet and make this big promise, have everybody pay you, and then you just skip town, right?
Right.
So PayPal locks our account. So we don't even have access to any of that money. And we stopped taking pre-orders. We just put a sign-up list on there, and our sign-up list was over 20,000 people.
Jeez.
And so that's how that all started. And we just struggled to get the product out. It was on the blogs. People were starting rumors that it was all fake and they're not going to get their stuff and they're looking for me. And it was quite scary. They're saying, oh, that, these guys aren't real and this is where they live. And
oh, man, no kidding.
So while that's going on, I'm flying all over trying to get machine shops and things going. And we're trying to, as we get parts in, we now have a shop and we're hiring people to assemble parts and cases and ship. And, we're somehow all the work we're doing, we're barely chipping away at this pre-order list. So that went on for quite a long time before we can kind of get control of that. And things always settle down in the iPhone industry because there's always another iPhone just around the corner.
Right.
So then as soon as the next one, the S came out, the 4S, and things settled down because people aren't as interested in a case for the 4.
So now when you come to the 4S or the 5 and stuff, now you don't know the design. Now, is it different? Now you can't design that. Was that the competitive advantage you had there?
We had to wait. We did designs based on the rumors that it was not going to change. It was only going to be a software and hardware update, and the actual case wasn't going to change. So we designed the next round of cases, and we're still trying to, we're hoping that we can still sell our old case. And so that was before we started working with injection molding and offshore. But every iteration of iPhone after that, we started to use different vendors. We started to manufacture offshore and hire engineers, and it just grew from there. And as fast as it all grew, it stopped even faster. Right around iPhone 6, we had some real issues with that iPhone 6, going from iPhone 6 to 6S. So things came to a halt really fast, and things go from, in a business like that, things grow fast and they can shut down even faster. And I saw it all. I saw rapid growth to,
yeah,
to some serious problems. And
gosh,
Yeah, it got pretty scary for a while there.
What was the scary part, just other than people knowing where you live and stuff?
Well, that was the early days, but once we were around iPhone 5 and 6, everybody knew who he was. Everyone was copying us. Even the big companies tried to come out with their own high-end line.
Oh, right. So you were like one of the only ones doing this high-end case.
Right. So we did high-end stuff with we machined exotic woods, cocobolo, ziricote, and all these really exotic high-end woods for people who like the luxury. And then we had the tactical side where we had G10 and carbon fiber and all these military finishes and materials.
Right. Which is what Element's doing now. If you look at their site, elementcase.com.
Yeah, they've leaned more towards that. We also had the sports side where it was all about lightweight and high performance. It was titanium and carbon fiber and things like that, machined aluminum. So we had those three areas of the company, and yeah, people were trying to rip us off left and right. But when you build a brand, everybody just wants your brand. They don't want a copy of it. Back then, I don't know how it is now. I have no idea, but things turned really fast with iPhone 6S because again, we didn't know if it was going to change or if it was going to stay the same. So what Apple does, from what I've heard, is they're designing multiple projects, multiple phones. So that the iPhone 6S, they have different teams working on different versions of it, depending on what is actually going to launch, because maybe some technology may not actually happen. So they always have a backup plan. There's a lot of stuff floating around out there as to what the next one's going to be. And you have to just kind of develop a design based on what is out there at the time. And we gambled, and there was a rumor that it wasn't going to change at all. And for a plastic or rubber case, that's okay. But for our stuff that has really precision fit machine parts and combination with injection molded parts, if the design changes a little, it doesn't fit right. And that's what happened to us. And so when the iPhone 6S did launch and things didn't fit quite right, we started to see cases breaking because they were overstressed. So we got a lot of returns, and we had to stop production. So you're doing a lot. You're paying people back. You're paying for shipping. You're trying to fix the problems with your vendors. A lot of stuff happens at once. And the hard part is you don't really have a lot of time. You really only have a few months to make money in the iPhone business because they're on to the next one.
Jeez.
And because we're a high-end company, it's the customers we have. They're kind of the early adopters, and they're looking for the next iPhone. They're going to upgrade to the next iPhone as soon as it comes out.
Right. And probably get your case and probably buy your case again if you have it for the new one.
They will if you have it, but they're the first to drop your case if a new phone comes out. They're the first to drop a high-end product or to not buy because they're going to wait for the next one. So whereas if you have a plastic case, you're going to give your phone to somebody else, and they're going to buy a cheap case because they got this phone for free. It's just a different market, a different customer.
Yep.
So
right. Wow.
We chased that world for a while, and it was tough.
How'd you eventually pull out of this? When did you decide, hey, I got to get out of this?
Well, there was I do remember some of the lowest lows and the highest highs. I remember in the heyday, we were doing $1 million in sales every month.
Wow.
For those months that it was hot. And for a small company, that's doing pretty good.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. And then at the lowest lows, I remember thinking, man, we owe $1 million.
Oh, wow.
And that's what I think the lowest low was I was in San Francisco, and I saw a homeless guy. He was down and out, and he had a little cup there. And I was just thinking to myself, man, that guy, he doesn't realize how good he has it.
Right.
How bad it feels to owe that much, to be in debt that much, and I think that was the lowest low where I decided I can't keep going through this. And, but fortunately we still had a good brand, and, another really good company in San Diego, purchased us, and I was able to go work for them, and it was a really good company. And then at that time I decided I'm just not interested in staying in the consumer electronics industry. I just got to get back to outdoors. So I left the company and just decided to take a break and fish and ride my dirt bike and mountain bike. And And then that's when Mavrk happened.
Wow. God, that's a crazy story. So I mean, and we all see it, whether you're in California, and I'm not sure around the country. I haven't been to every state, but the homeless is definitely, you see it, right? I know where I am, you see it everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's a struggle, it's a real struggle, because you're just like, and sometimes I think about the same stuff. You're like, and I've actually had family members who have been homeless, you know what I mean? Like, so it's like been like legit. I've seen that stuff, and it's just like, and to be in your situation where you owe so much money and you're thinking like, wow, that homeless thing would actually be kind of good right now, right? I mean,
yeah, when you start to look up to the homeless, you got to do something different.
Right, right, exactly.
It's like this, Dave. It's like if you go gambling, if you go to a casino and you go there and all of a sudden you start winning, right? And you're doing great. And then all of a sudden it turns. You're playing blackjack, and every single hand you lose until pretty soon you've lost all your winnings. You're going, okay, do I quit now, or do I try to build it back up? Do I quit now and I have some gas money to get home? And you just got to make that decision. And that's kind of where I was at the time. Was it's like, you know what? I'm not going to risk more
of a hole.
Right. I'm just going to punt. I've got a nice out here, and I'm going to have a nice job, and I'm going to get to, live to fight another day.
Exactly.
So it all worked out pretty good. I learned a lot, and it was a stressful.
That's amazing. So when you have Element Case now, you're moving on from that. When you go into Mavrk, what do you take from Element that helped you, get it? Because what you have at Mavrk is really sweet. It's clean, it's good, it's really great products. I think I love just everything you have going there. Did you take a lot from Element for Mavrk?
Oh, I took a huge amount. When you start a company, you get to do something, which is you get to design your own company the way you want it. Element Case kind of grew to the point where I wasn't doing the things that I enjoyed doing. I wasn't able to design as much. I wasn't able to speak to customers. I mean, we really had a good following, and I wasn't able to do that. In fact, I remember walking into our customer service department, and we had hired a gal who I was listening to her answer the phone, and she was just so rude.
Oh,
and
man. Damn.
I was so upset over that I told my operations guy, yeah, keep an eye on her. If she talks to a customer like that again, get rid of her. And it's unfortunate that, that I lost touch with everything like that, but I don't want that to happen again. And the consumer electronics industry is just so much bigger than fly fishing. Fly fishing is small. So that's what I took was I want to keep doing what I like doing. It's not about the money or how big you can grow a company. It's about what do you really like to do day to day? What is your involvement in the company? And I like to design. I like to do create content. I like to fish, and I like to talk to my customers. So I think that what I really took from Element Case was, man, you got to look to the future, and you got to plan. Had I had stayed small, I think Element Case would have been okay.
Today's episode is sponsored by Mavrk Fly Fishing. They make the lightest Euro nymph reel in the world, which makes your rod more sensitive, casting more accurate, and you can hold your dead drifts longer without the shoulder burn. This reel is so unique you may not even recognize it as a fly reel. I had a chance to fish the stinger reel with Jeff on his home river on the Truckee. The biggest thing that I remember is the weight. The weight really stuck out because you can't even barely tell there's a reel. It's essentially kind of like you're holding a rod all day long. I mean, it's that light, and when you're Euro nymphing, that is a key. And the other big thing I remember from that day was catching a fish on my first cast. Pretty cool to be down in that part of the country and have some great success with Jeff. Mavrk keeps things simple by offering a Euro nymph product line with essentials you'll need from rod, reel, fly line, and leader system. Euro nymphing doesn't have to be complicated, so let Mavrk Fly Fishing get you started right now. You can learn more by checking out Mavrk's YouTube channel for some tips and tutorials. And you can also head over right now to wetflyswing.com/Mavrk to check out the good stuff they have going. That's Mavrk, Mavrk, wetflyswing.com/Mavrk to support this podcast and take a look at one of the most unique and efficient Euro nymphing setups on the market. Okay, back to the show. How would you have stayed small with Element?
The demand grew so big that we had to change the way we design products. It was more of a mass produced thing. So
right. So if you would just said, come in and say, you know what, we've got this mini thing and there's these people will get it and everybody else won't get it.
Exactly. We only make so many.
Yeah. Scarcity.
Right.
And then you can charge more.
Yeah. But I mean, at least we wouldn't have those issues we would have had, because when you scale, you're investing in tooling. And an example is we made an interior liner on the inside of the phone to protect from the aluminum or the titanium. And that was all. We used to use hand laid pieces of microfiber and things like that. But as we got bigger, it was just too tedious and we wanted to cut that labor out of it. So we designed an injection molded liner that was around between the phone and the metal. And that was a huge mistake, because once that liner didn't fit, then nothing fit. And you can't change that. Once it's injection molded, and then the model of the phone got actually changed with the 6X. So it didn't fit anymore. So had we had stayed small and not worried about scaling, we wouldn't have run into that.
Right. That's it. Yeah. Looking back on, and now when you look at Mavrk, so you're where you are now, how does and you're thinking about that? Like, well, I guess it's a smaller market, so it's easier.
It's a smaller market, but that's okay if you're a smaller company, right? The market size doesn't matter if you're we have fly shops everywhere. It's plenty big enough for a small company. And what I decided was I wanted to keep Mavrk small. Mavrk's it's like a special club. When I started it, I didn't want it to grow out of hand. I didn't want to have to be managing a lot of teams of people. I didn't want to have worrying about distributors and all the different channels of distribution. If I kept it small, then it doesn't matter how big the market size is. It's plenty big enough for a small company. The other thing is, I get to keep in contact with my customers. And my idea was always to sell really great products, but at a good price. And the only way I can do that was to cut out all the channels of distribution, right? My price I've always dreamed of doing like a pro level rod that was half the price of a rod that you'd buy in a retail store. And I can do that because I'm selling it direct. But if I were a big company, I couldn't do that. I'd have to make sure that there was enough margins there for the company, and their bigger companies have more expenses. Then you've got to pay the sales reps, and they get their cut, and the store wants their cut. So, a fly shop will pay for $100 item. They're paying $50. So, I wanted to just cut all that out, and I can do that only if I stay small. And that's part of the whole business planning is, okay, once you make that decision, you can't undo that and say, okay, now I want to sell my rods in fly shops. And that's because you didn't build in enough margin to pay everybody to do that. Because the fly shops, they have they're doing the selling, they're doing the promotions, they're doing the advertising for you sometimes. They're paying for the rent. So they have a lot to do on their end in order to sell your rod. So it's a partnership. And the other thing, if I sell a rod into retail and I raise my price so that I can do that, I have to stick with that price online because I can't undercut my partners. The fly shop is my partner. So staying online and selling direct, that's enables me to sell it for a lot cheaper.
Yep. I gotcha. Okay. So that's interesting. And well, let's think of this as maybe I was kind of thinking this like some tips on if somebody's, creating a product, or maybe some things to avoid. So let's take it there just for a sec here. If somebody's thinking about a product, it could be in the fly fishing space or just outdoors. What would you tell them if they have this idea like, hey, I've got this great idea for this new whatever, like box that holds all your camping kitchen stuff, right? Or, something like that. What do you tell them to say, hey, here's what you need to do. Here's some tips before you get started to think about getting into this. Would you have some good advice there?
Yeah, definitely. You have to cost out whatever the product is that you're designing. You have to talk to somebody who knows have an idea of what you think this box is going to be made of. And then you've got to talk to preferably an industrial designer, somebody who knows a little bit about materials and manufacturing and also knows the industry, and saying, okay, this is what the market might might bear.
So if you had a cooler, let's take it back to that cooler. So at coolers, in the summertime, as climate change seems to keep getting warmer and, warmer, like I heard something about the global temperatures were at a max all-time high, right?
Yep, on 4th of July, and yeah.
So, I mean, that's the reality, right? This is where kind of we're heading. And so, like the cooler, this rotomotive cooler is cool because it keeps your stuff good for like 6 days. You're on a hot trip. That's great. But you got this idea for a cooler that isn't as heavy
Mhm.
because you're on your boat and you don't want to carry something that weighs 200 pounds. And then you said the first thing is getting, costing out. So, like Yeti cooler is $500. The brands that are lower name brands are $250, $300. But your product, you want to be lighter. So you're saying basically go out there and find somebody in the industry who knows who's involved in this and start picking their brain.
Yeah, well, first I would, even before that, what you can do is if you think you have a technology to make something like that, in this case, a cooler lighter, I would say you have to first think about what are the features and what's the value proposition? How much is this going to cost? Well, before cost, I would say, what are the features of this cooler that are going to stand apart from the rest of the coolers out there?
Yep. I think lightweight would be actually a good feature to say, hey, it's going to keep it just as cold, but it's going to be half the weight, right? I
Right.
don't even know if that's possible, but that would be a good feature.
Right. So if you thought you had a technology that could do that, then you'd want to start. You'd want to think about, okay, what's it going to cost to build? What's it going to cost to sell? What's your whole business plan? How are you going to monetize this cooler? And the marketing, how will you market it? And then also just the business strategy. Do you want to start a company, build a brand from nothing, and try to sell this cooler that no one's heard of that you think is better?
Right.
You can do that, but you have to be able to convince somebody that it is better. And you have to ask yourself that, do you have the marketing ability to convince somebody who's never heard of you when you've got all these other brands around?
Yeah. Versus the the example which I did in the past where you can go to overseas and just find a product, and there's plenty of companies, at least back when I was there, that would just basically, you could buy a product and private label it, put your label on it, right? And so that's totally different, but there is that option. But what you're saying is really creating something unique, which is the better way to do it. And I think about the way we did this, when I first started the Wet Fly Swing, I mean, we started as a blog, and I was trying to really figure out the blogging thing, and it just didn't go anywhere because I wasn't a great writer, and then when I picked up podcasting, instantly it was like, oh wow, this actually is resonating with people. And that's because I enjoyed it, right? And I just found something. And I think maybe that's some good advice, right? Is find something you like to do instead of trying to push it.
Right, right. And I wouldn't say being innovative and coming up with a new cooler is going to be a better way to go than private labeling something. It all depends on what your
Okay.
mission is and what your plan is.
So private label still could be great.
Oh yeah, yeah. If you don't want to deal with all of the marketing and there's so much more involved in trying to convince somebody of something. Whereas if you just want to make money and you just want a private label, that could be an easy.
Yeah. Well, for example, let's stay on that. So we got the Wet Fly Swing podcast cooler, right? So you go over to wherever, and you get this cooler, throw on a label, and now you got this thing. And again, we have an audience here of people that listen, so it'd probably be easier than starting from scratch. But you're saying that is a potential way to go.
Right, right. I mean, anytime you have any kind of leverage and a specialty that you can leverage to market it, that's a great thing. For me to design something, if I didn't have industrial design and manufacturing background, it would be very difficult for me to design a product because I've got to have somebody. I've got a lot of thoughts floating around in my head, but I don't know what to do. So to get those thoughts out, you've got to talk to somebody. You got to tell them what you're trying to do and let them, spin on that for a while and come up with some concept sketches and then circle back and meet with you. It's like, does this work? Does that? They're basically trying to get your ideas out because they have the tools to do that, the skill to do that. And so that's what I would say is it a product that you need to go to a somebody for some consulting for, or maybe you're really strong in branding, and you've done a lot of brand development in the past, and you know exactly how to position this cooler, but you need help on the product design engineering side. Or maybe you're a product engineer and you design this cooler, you don't have to do anything else, but you've never branded a product or a company before, and you need some help on that side. And another direction you can go is you can come up with a product and you can have it designed and cost it out and everything. But before you invest in building a company and all that, you can take that idea and maybe sell it to somebody who's already equipped to sell it. Maybe it's already in their wheelhouse to sell and label that. So innovative people, there's a lot of ways they can use their creativity. I just chose the hardest way, to where I'm going to come up with a product. I'm going to market it myself. I'm going to brand my own company.
Doing it all.
Right. Or I have to do it all.
Yeah. Which works, but maybe it takes a little bit longer.
Well, it does take longer. The more innovative something is, the longer it's going to take. There's this thing that marketers have referred to for decades, and it's called the diffusion of innovation theory. And what that's saying is every one of us, basically this theory is, it's the speed at which groups accept new ideas or innovation. And we all fall into, it's basically a bell curve. And we're all in one part of this bell curve. And we're either at the very beginning of the bell curve as innovators, and they're only like 2.5% of this group. And then you've got your early adopters, they're 13%. And then the early majority, when you get up towards the top of that bell curve, that's the early majority, and that's 34%. And as you peak and start to come down on the backside of that bell curve, you've got 34% are the late majority. And then at the very bottom, at the tail end, there's 16% are called the laggards. And you need to know kind of where your product is and who you want to. If you have a good understanding where all these groups and how they accept your ideas, it'll help you market. It can help you target certain groups. Like for me, like the stinger is very different, and it's kind of changing the whole way we think about fly fishing. So I want to go after the early adopters, because they're early adopters are the change agents. And that 13% is pretty important to have on your side, because they're looking for opportunities. They don't need a lot of proof. They can figure it out on their own. Okay, I get that. That group is, they call them the change agents. They're usually a little younger in age. They embrace change. They are a little more financially secure. They have higher social status. So what they've done is each one of these groups, they've broken them down, and we all fall into one of these groups.
For each product, for every product.
You can be in different groups for different products. So like what you're really trying to do is get to that 34% and the next level, which is the early majority. They're the watchers. They're the ones that are watching what's going on. They don't have as much social pull, but they tend to watch the early adopters, and they're eager to see if they like it, then they adopt it. And then you have the other 34%, which are the late majority, and they're the skeptical group. And they just kind of wait, and they're not as financially secure. Their social circles are some of the early majority. They're not really watching the early adopters. They're watching the early majority, right? So it's really interesting, the social circles that are within each one of these groups. And then you've got the 16%, which are the laggards. And you never want to market to them, because these are the slowest group to adopt new ideas, if at all. In fact, they have like an aversion to change agents. They don't like those young kids changing things.
Oh, so if you had the 9-foot 5-weight fly fishing rod, just the standard, where would that fit? I mean, you would be more laggard type people that just want the.
Well, yes and no. I mean, that has proven itself as, such a staple rod in your quiver, that I don't think that's going to go away. But this group may not accept Euro nymphing, for example, right?
Yeah.
They're more stuck on their way of fly fishing. They hold on to traditions. That's a characteristic. And their social circles, which is interesting. Their social circles are family and other laggards.
Oh, wow. Yeah. They're not spreading the word. They're not telling friends and stuff.
No, they're not telling friends about this new thing they saw. They're actually putting things down. Oh, I saw this, and and these guys are doing this. And so obviously you don't want to market to them. So in my case, I'm targeting early adopters so that the early majority can watch and learn and see what's going on. But it's really interesting. I did make a mistake early on in Mavrk, where a marketing guy I was working with convinced me to launch on Kickstarter. And that was a huge mistake.
Oh, it was. So Kickstarter wasn't good.
It wasn't, because we were fully funded and we did well, but it kind of hurt the brand in a way, because you got to remember, Kickstarter people are the innovators. They are that 5%. They're young, they have extra money, they want new ideas, but they're not fly fishermen, right? So they saw my product, said, "Oh, that makes sense. That's great. I want it." And we were successful in that way, but we weren't successful in getting that product into the hands of people who really know what they're doing, right? Like the Stinger is something for a more advanced, somebody who really appreciates lightweight, right? And the advantages of lightweight. Whereas the average Kickstarter guy probably just needs a reel where he can reel in a fish, right? He doesn't have the skills to strip. He doesn't have the skills to haul casts, or doesn't know what dead drifting is, right?
Yeah.
So we couldn't take advantage of all those people that we sold to on Kickstarter. In fact, we had to undo a lot of things because now we've got people just not understanding the product when they got it.
Oh, right. So everybody paid money. Gotcha.
Right.
Wow.
Right. So that's where I would say it's important to identify your target market. In our case, it's tightliners who are in agreement with our belief that tightlining is going to go lighter, not heavier.
Yeah.
Right. And that's way too advanced for the average Kickstarter person or beginner. So what we're saying is, going back to what we're saying is, tightlining is all about line control and elevating that line and getting a good dead drift. And you can do that better with a longer, lighter rod and lighter reel. You can control your line better. But that's at a level that is just so above the average fly angler. And the reason we're pushing this is because we kind of see fly fishing going almost in the wrong direction, where people are saying, well, the important thing with tight lining is balance on your rod. So to get balance, you're adding a bunch of weight to it with a bigger reel and adding weight to your reel. Well, again, you're reaching that point of diminishing return where, yeah, your reel is balanced or your rod is balanced, but now your arm is hurting because you can't hold it up. And everything about tight lining is holding that line above the water.
It is. So you can't, right. You need to hold your arm up and keep as much as possible.
Right. And the other thing people don't realize too is when you have a balanced system and you add all that weight, now you got this perfectly balanced 10-foot-6 or 11-foot rod. Now this thing weighs, you're getting into the 14-ounce range, which is heavy compared to a bare naked 3-ounce rod.
Oh, right. So that's it. 14 ounces versus your rod, like you're talking, the new rod is going to be like under 3 ounces.
Right. But then you add the Stinger and now we're at 5.3 ounces. But 5.3 versus 14 ounces is huge.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the lightweight thing is something that's the direction we see it going, especially with technologies with carbon fiber now. Getting the rods as light and strong as they are. I'm just waiting for that time when graphene is in popular in rods. Because at that point they're going to be able to use a lot less material versus regular carbon fiber that we're using now. And when you use less material, those rods are going to be so much lighter and stronger.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're waiting for that. I mean, some companies are claiming to use it, but I've studied graphene and I think the way that I think we're just not ready yet right now.
And what is graphene? So you got graphite, right? So that's what everybody knows. And you got carbon. Like, describe that a little bit, like graphene, graphite, carbon.
Well, graphite and carbon fiber are basically the same thing, but graphene it's a new nanoparticle that they have to mine. And the process of mining graphene is really laborious and there's not very much of this material. The process is really intensive. And then to be able to use that material once they've mined it, to use it in your carbon fiber, it's an additive to your carbon fiber. And if you had unlimited budget, you can use graphene. Like Formula One cars, I had a chance to go to McLaren in England and Lotus during my Element Case days, and I was able to see how they're building these Formula One cars, and they all use graphene in their carbon fiber because it just makes it that much stronger. And but they'll do anything to win.
Yeah,
I think when graphene gets to the point where they can use it in a fly rod, things are going to change drastically. But right now we're not there. Just adding some graphene dust into your rod isn't going to help. But sorry.
That's it. That's
how
amazing.
do we get on that? We went,
I love it.
What were we talking about before we got into?
I love it. I don't even remember. This is great. This is awesome. I love the graphene. I always Well, let me take it to this because this is a question I've been having. I know you probably have a good answer, but so let's take it to fly fishing. So we got somebody maybe listening here who has a product, maybe an idea of a new product. What should they know about the fly fishing kind of business industry that might help them, along the way that you've seen maybe some challenges or some advice?
Well, for one, it's a very small industry. So if you think that you're going to make a lot of money, it's not as likely in the fly industry as consumer electronics or other outdoor sports and activities.
Or even like motocross, or like we did. How much bigger is motorbiking than fly fishing?
Oh man, all of that stuff is so much bigger than fly fishing. So having said that, I would say that that could affect the way you design your company. Maybe you want to stay small. It doesn't matter that it's a small industry as long as your expenses and your overhead are low. Like think about some of the bigger fly fishing companies in our space, right?
Yep.
They've got a lot of mouths to feed. They've got a lot of expenses. They've got a lot of departments, and it's just not a real big industry. So if you look at the industry as a whole, our sector, fly fishing, and think of it as like a pyramid, right? You've got different sectors. You've got on the very bottom, you've got people who are not willing to pay a lot of money for things. They're going to pay as little as possible for their goods. And the opposite is the very tip of the pyramid. Those are people who are going to pay any amount to have the best or what they think is the best, right?
Yep.
But there's not as many of them. So you have to think about, where do you want to be?
Yeah, where are you?
Right. Where are you? For us, we want to be not at the bottom. We don't want to sell for the cheapest price, because remember, we're talking about performance and we want to sell really great products at a good price. But people may not buy from us because they don't know the name as well as some of the bigger brands. So the bigger brands, they may be able to sell stuff, just on their name alone.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like a vanity purchase. You want to have the best of the best and you can afford it. And that's great. If they can afford it, that's great. Our sweet spot is we're saying we're going to sell a great product, especially with this new rod. And we're selling a great pro level rod at about half the price. But we can only do that if we stay small and direct, right? So I've made that a business decision. And those are the things you have to think about. Like, do you want to sell a lot of something to larger audience and stay at the bottom of that pyramid, and take a smaller and have the bigger piece of the pie? Or do you want to niche down and be very specific?
Right. Yeah, you kind of get into that profit margin thing and all that conversation. This is good. So that gives a little insight on, again, reminding, we've talked about that quite a bit on the podcast, just how small fly fishing is. And you could even look compared to regular conventional fishing, it's still a tiny thing.
Right. And that's why it's important to realize it doesn't really matter if you want to stay small, but it does matter the bigger the company you plan to create. And then the other thing I would say too is the product and your strategy as far as product design and development. You really have to consider how many of these do you want to sell, because product design and prototyping, the cost of it is a lot different on, say, a machine product versus a injection molded product. Whereas injection molding, it's going to cost you a lot of money to engineer it and to make the molds. But after you're done with that, you can make product very inexpensively, right? And your profit margins will be a lot higher on a product like that, but you got to sell more. So if it's a type of product that you can sell more, then you want to think about those types of production or manufacturing processes. Whereas something that's CNC machined, you can get up and going a lot quicker. You can get into prototype and even manufacturing a lot faster and even cheaper sometimes, but your piece part costs are going to be higher. Your assembly is going to be higher, right? So you have to really think about the product and where you're going to position it relative to the industry, the particular industry that you're in, and make that hard decision. How am I going to do it? What makes the most sense with the amount of funds you have to get started? Maybe you don't have a lot of money, so maybe you only want to do small production runs. So machining might be better than forging, for instance, right?
Right.
But then once you grow to a certain size, then you want to switch over maybe to a forged metal part, which the tooling is expensive and it takes longer to make, but now you can stamp them out, right?
Yeah, I love that. No, I think that's a great take. I always think of it like with products in thinking or anything, you kind of, like you said, the pre-sale, right? To get out there, you got this idea, whether that's a course or whatever it is, or a trip. I mean, one easy way is just to go out to whoever that audience is and say, hey, I've got this thing, do you want to buy it? Here are all the features and benefits. And then get people to actually, that's kind of a launch, right? Well, you did the Kickstarter, but there's other launch ways to do it. And then, so that's one way.
Yeah, it's tough because you have to make all those decisions before you have a lot of data. So you just have to get the data that is out there, which is, okay, what's the closest competitor? What are they selling for? What's better about yours? Or how much cheaper is yours? Maybe it's the same exact thing, but you can come in at a lower price. So what is the advantage? And those are the things you have to think about. And you have to balance that out with what kind of company do you want? Do you want to, for me, I wanted to keep this very simple because I don't want to go back to a company where it grew to the point where I wasn't talking to customers and I wasn't, I was so out of the loop. I had no control over that. And, you know, I just didn't want that. I wanted Mavrk to be a small company that I could manage myself, only two, three, four people at most. And, if the opportunities are there to grow from there, then I'll worry about that later. But really try to keep everything under control. And then you have to just decide what your resources are. I mean, you have to figure out, well, you've designed your company, you know what your product is, kind of how much it's going to cost to design and develop it, how much time it'll take. So you've done all your research. Then you've got to figure out, well, are you going to fund this yourself or do you have to go out and find partners and do an equity share? And in that, there's a couple things you can do. You can find a silent partner who's just willing to give you a bunch of cash to do it and split the profits later. Or you can find a partner that actually has some strengths that you don't have and you can take advantage of that. Like for me, my partner is a web guy and he's really good. I could never do that and I don't want to learn that. And I also have a good accounting person, a CPA, and yeah, I could learn how to use QuickBooks, but I don't want to.
No, I know.
You know?
No, that's it. Find the right people to cover you.
Right, right. So that's the other thing is think about what team you're going to need at the very minimum and what work you're willing to do to have this business. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? How much risk are you willing to take? How much time are you willing to put into this business? So, I mean, it could be that if you want to get into fly fishing, the best thing for you is to buy an existing fly fishing company, right?
Right.
We hear this a lot, right? On some of your guests, they bought
Oh,
the
yeah.
company, they had the opportunity to move on something. And the good thing there is all the systems are in place. I mean, clearly there's going to be things you can adjust and you want to make it your own, but you're not starting from ground zero. You've already hit the ground running. Even if they're in financial trouble, you can fix that, right?
Exactly.
So that's always a good way to, get into the fly fishing industry if that's what you want.
Yeah.
So, I mean, luckily for us, it's an industry that we all like and enjoy. So, whatever it is, just being in the industry is fun.
Being outdoors.
Yeah, being outdoors and yeah. So there's a lot of ways you can do it.
No, I love that. I think that's a great way to wrap this up because I think you hit on some key points there. Anything else you want to share before we head out of here, and then talk about where you might send people to follow up on some, maybe some of this business stuff, or who some of your mentors, other things where you're learning about this stuff.
I would say business in general, learn how to write a business plan. There's actually a really good book out there. It's called How to Write a Business Plan, and it's put out by Nolo Books, and it's Mike McKeever wrote it. And I'm not suggesting that you buy this book because you need to write a business plan to present to a bank or do this. Writing a business plan really is a step-by-step process of going through all your ideas and fleshing everything out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And proving that everything has, you've answered all the questions and it is going to be a viable business. And then if you do need to go out and find money, you've got this plan already built, right?
Yeah.
So it's always a good idea to learn how to write a business plan. And just remember that, I built my whole career off of designing innovative stuff. And so I know how hard it is. And now to market something innovative and how long it takes. I mean, think about mountain bikes, right?
Yeah, there weren't mountain bikes. There wasn't a 29-incher at some point.
Yeah, I mean, right now it's common, but you look back at Gary Fisher. He tried to push the 29-inch or the 700C wheel for years back in the 90s and 2000s, and no one would listen. But his time came, right? And the industry
Yep.
accepted it. And I mean, it's happened all over in mountain biking. I mean, all those first full suspension bikes, they weren't started by the big companies like Trek, Specialized, or Cannondale, or a Giant. They were all started by small companies that none of us ever heard of. Monolith and Boulder Bike, San Andreas. How many of us have ever heard of Amp
No.
Research, right? They're the ones that designed and innovated full suspension mountain bikes. The big companies, they don't innovate because they don't want to take the chance. It's a big gamble for them. So they let the small companies innovate
Right. See what
and
the market says.
prove it, right? See what happens. Snowboarding, it wasn't invented by K2 or Rosington. I mean, that was invented by Jake Burton.
Gosh, I guess there's all those examples. And I mean, Apple is another good example, right? They didn't invent the iPhone, right?
Yeah.
But they created the best iPhone, or the best phone, maybe.
Yeah, that's kind of the opposite. They didn't really innovate the ideas or the technology. They were just really good at making it cool.
Yeah, making it cool. Well, he did have the idea. I think Jobs had the idea. He knew he wanted to take Apple into that thing, right? The phone being everything.
Right.
But it's a little different.
And if you're just interested in product design in general, because a lot of people ask me, well, how do I get into product design? I mean, you go to design school. It surprises me how like product designers, we sketch a lot, we draw a lot, and now we do it all on tablets. But before, it was all pen and pencil and markers and all that, right? And clay. People were always so intimidated. It's like, I can't draw. Well, it's not even about that, because it's just a skill and it's just a tool. If you've got ideas and you think that you like developing ideas and you'd like to be a designer, then go to design school. You'll learn how to do all that.
Right.
Say you like mountain biking. Well, design in the mountain bike industry. Maybe you had aspirations to be a pro rider someday and it just didn't happen. Well, you can still be in the industry, right? It's a lot of fun to be able to design and develop products for those, kind of the pro and elite level athletes. It's just kind of fun. It's a way to be at the very top of the, that industry, but you're not the athlete. You're the one supporting them with products.
Right.
And that's where I've always, that's where I've always had a lot of fun and gotten a lot of enjoyment out of a design career, was designing a Fox helmet for Ricky Carmichael, or, that was the winningest helmet in history, because at the time, he wore that helmet so much, and, it was a helmet I did. So I'm never going to be a pro motocrosser. That time is over for me, but to say I've been able to do that. And so I think that being a product designer is a good way to be close into the activities you like. And if you want to be in fly fishing and you want to, do what you like, that's probably the biggest takeaway, is you just have to be passionate about it, regardless of the money, right? The money will come.
Yep. You gotta love it. That's the bottom line.
Exactly.
You gotta love it. Like, do not go, if you're not loving what you're doing, definitely, don't do it. It's not for the money. That's probably the big takeaway, right? It's like, you're not going to make $1 billion probably in the fly fishing space.
You never will. But if you like it, so what? I mean, I think, as I've gotten older, my priorities have changed. I see things a lot differently now as far as my career and what I want to be doing with my time. And, it's a lot different than before. And I'm ready. I want to just step back and have a small company and just be a very special company to the people that buy from me. I don't want to ever grow to be a big company. It's just more fun for me that way,
Yeah, love it. Cool, Jeff. Well, I think we'll send everybody out if they have questions on any of this with the products, mavericusa.com. And then same, if they want to get a hold of your rods, check out this new rod coming that will likely be out when this is live. They can check that out. And we're going to have a special promo discount code as well that we'll have in the show notes people can check out. So until the next one, thanks for the time, Jeff. And it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave, for letting me ramble on about stuff non-fly fishing.
Yeah. That's what we love. We love keeping it interesting. So this has been awesome.
Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot.
There we go. You can head over to wetflyswing.com/484 right now if you want to check out the show notes. Take a look at that Mavrk gear. Jeff's got a new rod that just came out. You can find out what that looks like right now and you take it a step further. Let's give a quick listener shout out before we get out of here. Mitch Wilson. Mitch Wilson said, "Hi, Dave. I live in Arizona, and the Grand Canyon is where I call home. Been there since 2019 and the park system since 2004. Love your podcast, and in fact, listened to your most recent podcast last night while walking the dog on our nightly walk. Pretty new to the fly fishing world, but think about it daily. I'm actually going on a 4-day rafting trip at the end of the month in the Green River and hope to do some fishing too. Best, Mitch." Thanks, Mitch, for checking in, and definitely great to connect with you. I appreciate the support on the podcast. If you're listening right now and you want to get a shout out like Mitch, you can do that really easy. Just send a message anytime, dave@wetflyswing.com, or like I said, on Instagram. Check out there at wetflyswing, and we will get you a shout out and either read a question, read your email, or we'll ask a question of an upcoming guest. If you get a chance, please support our sponsors anytime. Click over there, wetflyswing.com/sponsors. A reminder, next week, we've got a great episode with Lily Renzetti. If you've ever thought about getting a new vise and don't know about the Renzetti, we hear the story. All right, I'm going to leave it at that and let you get out of here. I hope you're having a good evening, a good morning, or good afternoon, wherever in the world you are. Appreciate you for stopping by today and checking out the podcast. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.